Welcome back to the Matter of Facts podcast on the Prepper Broadcasting Network. We talk prepping, guns, and politics every week on iTunes, Stitcher, and Spotify. Go check out our content at mwfpodcast.com on Facebook or Instagram. You can support us via Patreon or by checking out our affiliate partners. I'm your host, Phil Rabley, and my co-host, Andrew Bobo, is on the other side of the mic, and here's your show.
Welcome back to Matter of Facts podcast. I have a frog in my throat. StreamYard is acting really belligerently angry this morning, and we're having some technical difficulties we're going to try to power through. Andrew's got a sore back. It's just kind of one of those mornings. We're off on the back foot already.
Yeah. So whatever. Day of adulting.
Yes. So I thought we would sit down today and have a really honest conversation where I'm not trying to make it into a roast, because I'm not just gonna so some of the things I've been thinking about don't just relate to me and my family, they relate to close personal friends of mine, but I thought maybe some cautionary notes about prepping and prepper screw-ups. It's probably an ugly way to put it, but we'll start there. Prepper screw-ups. Everybody's screwed up. Everybody that's ever tried to do anything has, kind of royally goofed up, forgotten something, done something the wrong way. Everybody has. And the only difference between the average person and these larger than life knuckleheads in social media land is that most people in Andrew and I's position that put ourselves out there from an audience never admit that we screw up. But Andrew and I admit that pretty regularly because, we're not experts. We're enthusiastic novices, and sometimes we just really screw something up. And I've always said that I think it's useful to others to hear those stories so that you don't have to pay the same price we did for the knowledge of how not to screw up again. Is that a fair way to put it, Andrew?
Yeah. I mean, no matter what we say, or even if we're like, hey, we did this, and it didn't work out. I mean, just because it didn't work out for me or work out for Phil doesn't mean it's not going to work out for this other, anybody else. But everybody's going to screw up. It's the part of growing, and it's just part of, figuring out what works for you, what works for your preparedness. So, yeah, you're gonna screw up. The biggest thing is just don't beat yourself up too bad about it. If something happens, if you bought a piece of gear, you're like, this is awesome, and then it turns out to be basically a flop, just move on. Replace that piece of gear, or don't use it, or use it just for fun, or whatever it is. But if it's not feasible in the long run, then don't beat yourself up too bad, because you're not the first person to ever do that.
Well, to borrow from that side of the house, I very frequently tell my daughter when she goofs something up, I always tell her, I'm messing up is human. You're going to mess up. That's how you learn. You learn more from screwing up than you do by doing it right. The only time you have to feel kind of bad about it is when you refuse to acknowledge the screw up and you refuse to fix it, because now you're going to repeat the screw up. And that is, dang, I'm having one of those mornings. Everybody, y'all gonna have to forgive me. But that is the moment at which a screw up becomes a problem, is when you refuse to address it. So let's start off on a high note. I can remember when I was very, very new, Matt saying we all screw up, just gonna make sure we learn from, pass on the knowledge. Exactly what I just said. But I can remember very early on in my prepper journey, I was working my way around the idea of how do I make sure I have water for my family? And in my environment, that's a multifaceted problem, because we have so much saltwater intrusion in this part of South Louisiana that even water sources that you would think are fresh, you have to be concerned about. Not only from runoff and animal feces and everything else, but you really have to be concerned that it might be brackish water, which you can't drink unless you have reverse osmosis, which I don't. And I certainly didn't back then. So the more, and I hadn't really got around to the idea of rainwater catch systems yet. So I was really stuck in this conundrum of I haven't drilled a well yet. I haven't done this. I haven't done that. How can I make sure I have water for my family? And then I was like, well, just let's go low tech, old school. Let's just start bottling up and storing water. And me being the perpetual cheapskate I am, and also at the time, scraping pennies to keep a young family fed, we started salvaging water bottles. And in particular, milk jugs, which is where the story kind of goes downhill really quickly. Because, we had lots of milk jugs on hand. And I figured, why not rinse them out with scalding hot water and reuse them? And that's what we did for a while. And then one day I was going out to the garage to my reloading bench, and I noticed a river in the garage coming from the rack of the milk jugs and leading downhill out the garage. And then I started pulling things off the shelf and assessing the situation, and that's when I realized that milk jugs are built very thin and very cheap, and they are made to last just long enough to get milk from the store shelf to your refrigerator and then be thrown away afterwards. So the the milk jugs are so thin, especially in the seams at the bottom, that just from thermal expansion, just from the being in the garage in an unconditioned space, and these weren't the ones with like little press tops. These were the screw-on tops that I felt like I could trust a little more. And as the thermal expansion would cause the liquid and the gas inside those milk jugs to expand and contract slightly over time, it was working the seams back and forth until they developed pinholes. And the next thing you know, all my water bottles, my entire emergency water stock is just raining and dripping onto the floor and out the garage. So that was oh yeah. That was a moment of mirthful, like, you little sons of... But, this is also why I've always told people, like, check your preps every so often. Make sure that what you put back, what you think you've arranged for a bad day, is indeed working and in serviceable, in serviceable condition. So when you need it, it's there. Now, had I ever tried to do this before? No. I could have gone the more traditional route of like buying the water cubes or any of a lot of different commercially available containers that were made for long-term water storage. I could have gone that route. Probably wouldn't have had the experience I did, but on the flip side of things, I canned all the milk jugs, and I shifted to a mixture of the 3-liter like big juice bottles, which are much thicker plastic, and also 2-liter Coke bottles or pop bottles, soda bottles, whatever part of the country you're in, gonna matter what you call those things. But I switched to those, and those have lasted just fine. They're all food grade. They're very easy to get a hold of. I mean, like, literally go talk to a bunch of your neighbors and ask them to save all theirs, and you'll have a couple of dozen within a few weeks, it seems like. So, like, that's what I did to build up the containers I needed for a water stock, and I did it very cheaply. It cost me, I would say it cost me nothing because it was all trash I'm repurposing. And it allowed me to put together a 28-day water stock for pennies on the dollar, what it costs to run your water taps to bottle up that much water yourself. It's city water, so it's already got a little bit of chlorine in it. It's already been sanitized, and it's worked. It's been a water system that I check on every so often to make sure those bottles are all behaving themselves, and they're doing fine years later, so I haven't had any more problems. But again, the milk jug debacle is one that I talk about occasionally, and I'm not shy about it. I'm not shy about admitting I goofed up. I tried something nobody else apparently had tried before, and now I understand why nobody else tried it.
Well, I mean, I tried it.
Did it work out for you any better than it did me?
No, it did not. We lived in my old roommate and we lived in an apartment complex on the second floor, and we, it's, hey, let's store some water. He was on board. It's okay, cool. So it's like, go to the store, we grabbed It was like the 2.5 gallon, or it was like the it was like I think it was a 2.5 gallon or whatever, the square jugs that you can buy. Bought a couple of those, bought some milk jugs, bought stuff like that, and um, yeah, we put it up in the pantry. Everything was all good, and then one day I'm sitting there, I'm like, why is there water coming out of the pantry? And open it up, and yep, it wasn't gushing water, but it was enough to where it was like, okay, if this keeps going, the neighbors below us are gonna be like, hey, you guys leave the water tap on? So yep, threw all those out and stuff like that, and yep, no, I did the same thing you did. Basically started 2 liter bottles, um, 2 liter bottles of soda, and after I drink one, wash it out, uh, soap and water, let it dry, and then just fill it up. Um, and then yeah, put that downstairs. And yeah, that's the thing is like the 2 liter bottles, or even if I mean whatever size you use. I mean, and then you store them in a place out of the sun, kind of thing, and there should be good. I mean, and then of course, got a couple totes of bottled water and stuff. Kyle, you said, have y'all ever thought about canned water to leave in a vehicle? Not canned, bottled water. I would actually, being in Michigan and stuff, I would probably trust the bottled water before I trusted the can, just because of expansion, especially in the winter. Bottled water, I have no fears of leaving in my vehicle all year long. Uh, it freezes, okay, great, but it generally just expands the plastic. The can that I've seen, I'd be just afraid. Like you just gotta make sure you get that out if you live in the winter, someplace that it gets cold, because it'll bust the cans. Like that's why I don't leave my bug out bag. I don't leave in the winter and stuff. I don't put canned goods in it. In the summer, I might throw some canned goods in it, stuff like that. But in the winter, I don't leave canned goods in there because of the water. It'll freeze, and I'm afraid I don't want it to bust and find an emergency.
I wonder
food,
if it would head that off if you had it in like a little cooler, just something to insulate. I mean, I know there's no heat source inside the cooler,
So
but
you can. Well, you can. So you here. I mean, winter places that are cold that freeze. You can throw bottled water. You can throw pretty much anything in the cooler because yes, it's an insulator. So it will. I've done that before, where eventually it will freeze, just because like eventually the temperature will drop far enough down into that in that insulator, whatever you use. It'll eventually freeze, but it'll last. It will stay thawed out a lot longer than if you just had it out. So
yeah. And me personally, like
yeah,
I don't use canned water, but I always have. I couldn't tell you how many water bottles I have like squirreled away in my truck because pretty much anywhere that I had room, like because we both have Tacomas now, but I've got all that storage underneath the back seat and then behind the back seat. And behind one side of the back seat is a subwoofer. Behind the other side is emergency roadside stuff, paper, toilet paper, the little LED emergency signals, like all kinds of stuff. But underneath the back seat, the back seats, anywhere I had room around other stuff, I've got water bottles packed. So I've got at least a gallon of water in the truck, which is to drink or to refill the radiator if I have a leaking radiator. And then I also make a habit of carrying like 20-ounce water bottles in all 4 of the doors, which is, again, for emergencies, but also in case I've got a passenger that says, hey, I'm thirsty. Well, there's a water bottle in your door, and as soon as I get back home, I replace it. So, I mean, I always keep water in the truck because I also keep mainstay emergency rations in the truck, and I don't know if anybody's ever tried to choke one of those things down, but you need some water to get one of those down the pipe. So, carrying emergency food without emergency water is kind of it's trading one emergency for another when you get that biscuit caught in your throat and you can't get it down.
yeah. But yeah, just I mean, throwing it in a cooler, you should be good. Uh, but like I said, it's I've had mine freeze before, but I guess it all depends on the cooler too. So um, yeah, the as far as a piece of gear for me that I bought that I don't ever see myself using is the solo stove. Um, I love the concept of the solo stove. I I using it like if you're camping, kind of using it. I have a smaller one, kind of like what Tommy had at the camping site. Uh, I like it. It's fun. It's a neat toy. It's cool. Like if you're like I said, if you're camping. But as far as like survivability goes, I don't. It's not. To me, it's not a practical item to keep in your kit, just because just how fast it burns through fuel. You can only
Mm-hmm.
put smaller twigs and stuff like that into it, especially if you have the smaller one. Uh, and you have to sit there and feed it. So basically, if you're by yourself, you have to sit there and you have to have a pile of twigs, and it chews through the fuel once it gets rolling because it starts burning so hot the way they developed it. Um, so I actually bought, I can't think of the name of it, but it's basically it's four walls. You set them up. You can put your pot right on top, and then you can feed a little bit larger twigs on top. But if you have to carry something small in order, I would say something like that because, well, again, this other one it actually breaks down to where it's like probably that thick, and then it's wide and so it breaks down flatter, so it can actually store a lot better. Where the solo stove is, depending on the size you get, it takes up some room. Um, but that's the one piece of gear that I don't necessarily regret buying because it's fun. But I've only used it like twice, I think, in the 4 years I think I've had it. I've used it like twice, I think, camping just to play with it, heat up some water, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, yeah, so the bigger ones, like I think the really big ones that you can buy for the backyard, I think those would be a lot pretty neat to have, but not the smaller ones.
Well, in that note, what Tommy had was the Mesa, which is one size bigger than the Light, which is the one I have and you have.
Yeah.
It's like about the size of a soup can.
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay, so the Solo Stove Light, I agree with you. It is like the only times I use mine is honestly for like a tabletop, just to have a fire going and like just kind of. I don't want to use the words play with it, but like I
Hmm.
don't use it for serious camp chores because it is very. When I'm trying to get my morning going, usually if all I need is some water to like run my French press and heat up some Mountain House, I'll get out the MSR pocket rocket, screw it on the top of a gas tank, give it a click, fire it up, start my morning pipe or my morning cigar, and just let it eat. And it will do that chore just fine. It does it quickly. It does it without me having to sit there and constantly foots with it and shove sticks into it. It is much, much, much simpler so that I have time and I have available brain bandwidth to like get my boots laced up and finish getting dressed and pick up stuff around the campsite, whatever. But when you're using a Solo Stove Light for camp chores, you have to sit there and babysit it because I mean, you're right, it chews through fuel, which is also by design because like with a rocket stove, like you're trading by increasing the amount of oxygen getting shoved into it and therefore increasing the amount of the fuel consumption of it, you're generating more heat. That's the trade-off. But Tommy had a Mesa, which a fair bit larger, could take a little bit larger stuff. My parents actually have one of the bonfire models, which I think is what you're talking about. And it's
Hmm.
probably about like a foot and a half, 2 foot across. That thing, I mean, my parents have put some pretty good sized logs into it. And I think it's because, like, your volume inside is increasing so dramatically relative to the size increase, the diameter increase, because you're dealing with a cylinder. It seems like you can get so much more fuel into them. They last a lot longer. Like you can, with the bigger bonfire models, you can fill them up with logs and then just leave it alone for an hour, which is something you can't do with the smaller ones. So,
Right.
but then again, with the larger ones, you also need like a wok or you need some kind of fairly large surface if you're going to use it for cooking or for camp chores, or you need a way to suspend a water pot over it. I mean, it's different strokes for different folks. I
But then again,
mainly
it's like you're not going to necessarily bring that the backyard bonfire solar stove. You're not going to bring that out into the woods. I mean, and if you're, I don't. I mean, I mean, you can, and I've seen people do it. But as far as like a survivalist situation, or just get out, bug out, or whatever it is, um, you're not gonna utilize as a prep. Um, as a prep item, maybe at home, yeah, you could probably you could probably keep it at home, but a prep item to take you with you on the road, it's not feasible.
no. My parents use theirs for RV camping,
Yeah,
so I mean they're pulling 30 feet behind them. The extra space for a solo stove bonfire is not breaking anybody's heart.
right.
But I'm not carrying that thing on my back into the woods. No, thank you.
Here, Piper, take this. This is your sole. This is your sole item.
Yeah, no, that's not happening. I'm glad you brought the solo stove light because I brought mine to the camping trip totally with the intention of like doing exactly what Tommy did, like stick it out on the, like pop it out on the table in case somebody never had a chance to use one. Maybe give some of the kids a chance to fool with it.
They're neat. I mean, they're very neat, but
Yeah, it has a specific like use situation where I feel like it'd be very useful. I feel like if you're going to be doing like backpacking or through hiking, and you would have to have a collection bag, and this is something I've told people before when they talk about solo stoves. I'm like, you need a collection bag on your hip, and as you're walking, you have to be retrieving like material to fill that bag, so that when you stop and you're ready to use that solo stove, you don't have to go forage. You already have all your sticks. And like finding fuel for a solo stove is really simple. If you can wrap your hand around it in a fist, like if it's that diameter, and you break it so that it is the width of your hand, it is the right size going into a solo stove light. Like, you just grab a stick and just start snapping it off hand width. And they will all fit in there, and as long as it's dry and it snaps, like with a nice clean snap, it's probably dry enough to burn. I mean, solo stove lights, they're easy to use, or they're easy to find materials for as long as it hasn't been raining. But they are something you're going to have to babysit if that's going to be your primary method of cooking. I keep one in my pack right next to my MSR Pocket Rocket. Guess which one gets used more often? It's the MSR, like 20-1 against the solo stove, because gas is not that expensive and my time is.
yeah. Yeah, let's talk about storage mistakes, because I have
Jesus Christ in heaven.
so like, there's totes out there, different styles of totes, and you learn which ones are great, which ones are not.
The hard way.
Yeah, the hard way. Yeah, I had I've upgraded to some heavier duty totes that actually, like, the handle folds over to the side and locks, and makes it pretty hard for critters to get in there, and stuff like that. Which we found out while we were camping that it works pretty good, because we had a coon outside, and it pulled, like, because I left some tortilla shells in the inside of the tote, and then somehow, I mean, it got in there, and it did get the plastic, and it pulled the plastic out of the bag, but it couldn't get the rest of it out, it was really funny, because, man, that thing struggled, and I could hear it on the other side of the yurt. It was funny, but yeah, I had it was a few years ago. I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago. I think it was after I I want to say it was after our first or second trip to prepper camp. I had some couple bags of coffee, some Mountain House pots, and like pots in a pan and a spatula and stuff inside of this little flimsy blue tote. And the tote, like, I mean, it was flimsy, and the top just kind of clicked on, like it wasn't nothing too major. Well, get home, unloading the vehicle, I take that tote, put it in the garage, and I kind of just forgot about it. Fast forward a year later, I go to grab. I'm like, okay, I'm looking for everything. I grab that tote, and it was still closed, but I popped it open, and I'm telling you what, there's a caffeinated mouse running around somewhere because it got into the coffee. It got into nothing else. It went through both bags of my coffee were shredded open. Bits and pieces of beans and stuff were sitting around. Never touched the MRE that I had in there, or the Mountain House meals. Didn't touch those at all. But man, it destroyed that coffee, and I'm like, dude, that thing is like he is running around like he's zipping around. But but like that, and then I got thinking, I'm like, well, that was the dumbest mistake on my end. Like, this is not secure at all. So yeah, I moved all my food over to a different tote, closed, locked it, and honestly, now it's actually in my garage now. But yeah, it's I mean, it's as far as things go, it's eventually it's going to come inside with some other stuff. But yeah, it would be. Yeah, no, that thing, man. I would love. It would have been funny to see that mouse because, yeah, both bags, whole bean, dark roast, like gone. Like, I mean, not gone. I mean, I didn't eat everything, but it was shredded. I'm like, well, that sucks because that's $30 in coffee for one. But but I had to laugh about it. So that's why if I buy any tote, it's the one that it's black with red handles. You can find it at Menards, I believe, and it locks. It's been rained on, all kinds of stuff, and it's been sealed up pretty good. So those are my go-to. If anything, I'll go a little bit better. Get one that's actually got a seal on it and stuff like that if I want to. But yeah, heavy when you're storing stuff for camping or just in general, just storage really. Heavier duty, the better. I like those, and I like the blue, the black and yellow one that's behind you, Phil. Like, I like that one. Those ones are good, but yeah.
So since you've taken us down this rabbit hole, I use that is my kitchen camping tote, and then right here are the other two primary totes that I use for camping. The first time, see, I got given those. I actually need to. You can't really read it on the camera, but I need to paint over the name that's on the top of it because it's a work buddy of mine who deployed with those to Afghanistan. Oh. She gave them to me when she was clearing out her apartment. Didn't need them anymore. But so the first time I took those camping, I looked at them and thought to myself, I'm like, okay, well, like, it's not like they're waterproof, but the way they're constructed, they should be okay. And, I took them out camping. So we knew we were going to get rain on that night, and I left them out from under cover because I'm like, if they're going to get wet, they're going to get wet. I'd like to find out the hard way now. And when I had originally looked at them, I looked at the way that the seams and everything were constructed, and there's basically it's almost like a tongue and groove type of arrangement where the top does this over the bottom. And I was like, okay, well, that should shed water to the outside. It'll be fine. It was not fine. There was a lake inside both of those totes the next morning. And I realized what I had not thought of was the fact that right where the piano hinge, the really cheaply made little piano hinge runs on the other side of the tote, there is no provision or thought given to how to make water shed to the outside of that. So water gets to that point, and then some of it goes over the edge, and some of it wicks back inside the lid, and then it just goes down inside. So, I mean, it wasn't awful, But I have since learned my lesson with those that if it's going to rain and they're not going to stay on the back of the truck underneath the soft topper, I actually keep a roll of duct tape in one of them, and I just duct tape all the way around the lid. Just to just keep, just kind of provide like a little skirt to encourage the rain to go around the lid, the edges of the lid, and not come back inside. But yes, storage totes are, I think we all probably have a horror story about those. Jim Rouse saying he broke a lot of those yellow lids. They're okay. They take a fair amount of punishment. The biggest issue I have with that one is actually the little locking handles on the side. They don't stay locked. Like, every time I put that in the back of the truck before I got the soft topper, I used to make sure that I would run one ratchet strap over the top of that and the cooler next to it, just to make sure that just to make sure the lid stayed down. Because, like, that thing, those handles, if you look at them funny, they'll just flop open for no reason. But honestly, like, I don't know. I've got some totes. I actually keep all my old Army gear in up in the attic, and I cannot remember what brand they are, but those things are really, really tough and really good. But like the big ones are like $120 to $150. Like, they're not. That's the real problem, is that when it comes to totes, I have never seen an exception to the rule: you get what you pay for. I've never seen one. If it's a cheaper tote, it's cheap for a reason. And if you want really good ones that you can stack up and take a lot of punishment, be prepared to pay for it, because there's just no free lunch on that, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you want to go hardcore and go Pelican everything, but
You don't even have to go Pelican or everything. Like I said, there's a brand, and I want to say it's like,
yeah,
there's a brand, and it'll come to me as soon as we stop streaming, and I'll think of it. And everybody's probably heard of them because they're a very well-known brand. But like I said, they're still hideously expensive, and that becomes the problem. And then you get into like the overland stuff where it's like Rome and all those, and it's like they're all just expensive. And I think I think there is definitely a delta where like the price is reasonable, but it's tough enough. And wherever those 2 points come together on the graph for you is where you need to shop. I would just say that like the $20 Walmart special Stereolites, think long and hard about those.
you're right.
Oh, since we were talking about camping and everything, someone at Prepper Camp this past year that you didn't make it, someone learned the hard way that you're not supposed to leave food around your campsite.
Uh-oh.
I don't know how it was stored. This happened down in Tent City. We were up on top the hill, but the next morning we heard loud and clear, because they were letting all the campers know what had happened, so that nobody else did this. But apparently somebody left some food unsecured, and a bear wandered into Prepper Camp.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, little black bear, woman. I'm going to assume a fairly inexperienced lady camper left. She was camping by herself. She left food around the campsite, woke up to the bear rooting around, jumped in her car, locked herself in, and hit the panic button to scare the bear away.
Oh, jeez.
It worked, but
I think expensive. Everybody else getting woken up.
Well, I mean, if it had happened at our end of the campsite, gunshots would have woke everybody up too. We'd have been eating bear.
They're more afraid of you than anything.
I don't care if they're scared; they're delicious.
Yeah, bear is good. That would have been a good experience. Rick and Jane might have asked us not to come back that year, but
we might have been asked to leave. But we'd have probably been asked to leave. That would have
happened. My ex and I, we went camping in Tennessee, and I've been thinking we left our cooler outside, which nothing got into it, but the park rangers were not happy at all with us. The next day they were like, is this a y'all's cooler? Yeah. You cannot leave this out, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, it locks. no, it doesn't matter. You can't do it, and all. Yeah, so funny.
So at this juncture, I have to administer a mild roasting to a friend of mine
Uh-oh.
because this is his goof up, and I don't know. He's a little newer into this whole thing than I am, so it's not like I can say like, well, you're an idiot. You should have thought of that. It was like it was just one of those things that he kind of blundered into, and quite frankly, everybody here has probably blundered into it at one point or another. So it's a good cautionary tale. So during COVID, during ammo-apocalypse, when like you had to do backroom deals for questionable.
Which election cycle is this?
Huh?
I said, which election cycle is this? Because I seem like that happens every election cycle.
During COVID.
Oh, okay.
So the COVID ammo apocalypse.
Oh, okay.
Back when you had to do like questionable things for 22 LR and 9mm. Like normal ammo is difficult to find. So like think back about 2 years ago now, I think it probably was, when like I was excited for a friend of mine to sell me 22 LR from his gun store at like 40% more than what it would have cost 6 months prior, because nobody else had it. This was back when gun stores were like, they would only sell you ammo if you bought a gun, and that was to make sure they had enough ammo in stock so they could sell a prospective gun buyer a box of ammo with the gun. I mean, it was just that kind of environment. For anybody that doesn't remember or didn't experience that themselves, I certainly did. And during all this, a buddy of mine who I'm determined to get on the show, I think he's hilarious, first of all, but he's kind of been on my coattails in his prepper journey for quite a few years now. And he called me up and he was like, dude, I just got this screaming deal on this little revolver. I got it for like I can't remember what he said he spent on it, but it was a good deal for a handgun in 2021. And he's like, but I can't find ammo for it. And I'm like, my mind immediately goes to like, I mean, ammo is hard to find, but like, what revolver could you have gotten that you can't find any ammo for anywhere? Like, I'm sure I have some, or I can find enough. I can find somebody with some. We could at least get your cylinder filled. Like, what you got? And he's like, I have a 32. And I was like, okay, well, that's a little off the beaten path. You got a 327 Federal Magnum. Like, that's a spicy one. It's a little off the beaten path, a little hard to find ammo. He's like, no, it's not a 327 Magnum. It's a 32. So I tell him at that point, send me a picture of your barrel. I want to know what exactly we're dealing with. He had purchased for a very reasonable amount of money a 32 H&R Magnum.
Jeez.
From a person who sold it because he couldn't find any ammo for it either.
So he bought it.
Well, now here's the thing. My buddy was like, "That's a really screaming good deal for a gun," and I don't remember what it was. I don't want to misquote myself or him. But it was an amount of money where if a person just offered you a random gun for this money, you'd probably throw the money at him. I was like, yeah, I'll take a random gun for that amount. Like, it was a stupid deal. But once he got the gun, he went to every gun store on his end of town, and absolutely none of them had any. None of them could get any from their distributors. Nobody could find ammo for a 32 H&R Magnum. And I am familiar with that cartridge because Gillian had one when we were in college together. And it is unusual and off the beaten path and difficult to find. It is basically a cut down 327 Federal Magnum for all intents and purposes. 327 Federal Magnum is a slightly longer, higher pressure 32 H&R Magnum, which is a longer, higher pressure 32 Special, which is a longer, higher pressure 32 Short. Like, it's a 32 cal revolver, straight wall revolver cartridge. But finding ammo for it in 2021 during ammo apocalypse, when every ammo manufacturer on Earth is running 3 shifts just trying to pump out enough 9mm and 5.56 to keep up with the general population, wasn't happening. Mm-hmm. I checked every distributor I know. I checked everywhere. I used AmmoBot. I called personal friends of mine in the area who are gun nerds that would make some people like shrivel. I beat the bushes. I looked hard. I looked for brass because at that point I was like, well, F it. Let me find some brass and I'll buy some dies and shit. You can pay me back in like booze or cigars or something. I will make you 32 H&R Magnum in my garage. I've got a reloading press. Couldn't get the brass. Couldn't get the dies. It was that kind of situation. I was forced to admit after 24 hours. I'm like, bud, we got a problem, man. I can't find any ammo for that gun either. And he's like, how in the hell is like gun nerd Phil, the gun nerd of South Louisiana, cannot find ammo for this freaking revolver? And I'm like, well, that's probably why he sold it. He couldn't find ammo for it either. So, now, I will admit that was a unique set of circumstances and a unique time period during the COVID ammo apocalypse, but it is worth considering whenever you are getting offered a firearm in a cartridge you have not heard of and do not currently have ammo for. You should probably take a second and do some Googling to make sure ammo is available and still being produced for that firearm, because those of us that are more than casual purveyors of firearms understand that there are lots of guns floating around out there that they haven't made ammo for in years. They don't make ammo for anymore. If they do make ammo for, it's like once every 3 years, a company will make a few hundred rounds at a crazy markup, and it'll all get bought out. It'll be 3 more years before any of that ammo is made. And if you think I'm exaggerating, no, I am telling you that happens in certain cartridges. Right, Andrew? Like, back me up on this. I'm not just making this up. This literally happens exactly like that.
Yeah. Yeah, just make sure you're just using if you're looking for a firearm during a crunch, try to make sure that you can find ammo for it. Or if you're planning on buying a firearm, start buying ammo now. I did that when I first was my first AR. I bought 5.56 for a little bit, like a couple months before I actually built mine and everything. It was just box here, box there, stuff like that, and that way I knew I knew when I had it, I could just go out and shoot. I didn't have to wait. So,
no, I mean that's just. Then again, this is the same guy that like I've beat him up so many times about the fact that like he needs more mags. For everything. Like I tell everybody, I'm like, my bare minimum for auto loading handguns is 3 mags per pistol. And when I say bare minimum, I mean absolute bare minimum. My primary carry gun, I think I've got 5 mags, maybe 6.
Yeah.
Do you need to skip out, or do we need to wrap this up?
No, I mean, I got a couple more minutes.
Okay. But so that is kind of, you know, those are the prepper screw-ups that kind of come to mind most vividly. I mean, do we really need to go over the fact that I sat here for Cat 4 Hurricane with no chainsaw in the house, or can we let that go finally?
Yeah, we can let it go.
Okay, because you know, living in suburbia hell as a homeowner, I didn't. The chainsaw was on the list of stuff, but it was in the I'd like to have, not the I need to have. And it wasn't until an oak tree slammed down in my yard and one hit the house that it got elevated into the I need category.
Right.
So, you know, live and learn.
No, I'm kind of curious in the chat, message us, all that stuff. I'm kind of curious on your prepper screw-ups, stuff that you bought that you were like, yeah, I don't really need it anymore, and stuff like that. So be kind of curious to see what people say.
Yeah, and understand that when I say prepper screw-ups, this is different from I've outgrown the gear, or I bought it for this and I don't use it for that anymore. I'm talking about this piece of gear, I bought it for this purpose, and for that purpose, it does not work. Either it's junk, it broke, it just doesn't work. It doesn't fill the need. Those are the things I'm interested in, because like I feel like telling those stories means that somebody else might see that and say, I was thinking about getting that, but I think I should do a little bit more research now, because like it's not the money at the end of the day that's the biggest problem. It is depending on a piece of gear and it failing you. That is the part that worries me, because fortunately I've caught most of these screw ups before they've put me in a really bad situation. But just in case you don't, it would be helpful to have somebody else that's already been down that path say, nope, turn around, go back to the last branch. You don't want to go any further down this road. But yeah, leave us your comments, jump in the chat, hit us up on social media. If you're a patron, you talk to us all the time anyway. And we'll talk to y'all in another week, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.